Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to bring you my September wrap-up. I had two main goals in September: to read Queer SFF to research for the video I recently made recommending Queer SFF, and then once the 15th hit, I began exclusively reading books by Latinx authors. So the first book I read in September was Demon in the Whitelands by Nikki Z. Richard. This was kindly sent to me by Month 9 Books as inspiration for my video on Queer SFF, where I have already discussed and reviewed this book, so definitely check that out. After that, I listened to The True Queen by Zen Cho, read by Jenny Sterlin. In the words of Zen Cho, this is queer historical fantasy about two Malaysian Muslim women, one of whom is queer, as they fight racist magicians and help a gay dragon rescue his boyfriend while trying to take down the evil fairy queen, and it is an absolute delight. The main character, Muna, wakes up on a beach with her sister Saki, and they don't remember anything besides the fact that they have been cursed. They also realize that Saki is slowly fading from existence, and that the only way to save her is to travel to the Sorceress Royal in Britain, who specializes in teaching young women magic. Zen Cho is really fantastic with crafting these fantasy of manners that are adventurous and tongue-in-cheek, but that also thoughtfully interrogate deeply relevant issues on the page. Muna, who is not naturally gifted in magic, is ridiculed by the English, by men, by high society, but she doesn't take it sitting down, and more importantly, she never stops in her search. There are times when she's flaunted in front of society as some kind of exotic treasure for being Malaysian and Muslim, but she makes it clear that she's not interested in being viewed as some kind of rare object. This story is a fun, exciting, enthralling take on women helping women, outcasts helping and uplifting outcasts, and finding power in the ways we are different. I think it's also about how women especially are expected to compartmentalize themselves and make themselves smaller in many ways, and this story shows the incredible things that can happen when they refuse to comply with those expectations. Overall, this was a really enjoyable and interesting story. I will definitely read anything Zen Cho writes, and I gave this one 4 stars. Then I finally read Our Bloody Pearl by Deanne Bryn, which is destined to be one of my absolute favorite books of 2019. I talked a bit about this one in my Queer SFF video, but this is an Own Voices queer NB fantasy story about a non-binary siren who is captured by pirates, tortured by them, and then injured to the point of partial paralysis in the process. Just when they're giving up hope of returning to the sea, the ship that has served as their prison is overtaken by a different crew of pirates, but now the presiding captain is someone who is gentle, kind, thoughtful, and empathetic. This story does contain triggers for peripheral discussions of trauma and abuse, though I don't believe it's on the page, and the protagonist is also dealing with episodes of PTSD. The number one phrase I can use to describe this book is soft as fuck, because it is utterly soft as fuck. You might go into this expecting this dark exploration of pain and distrust, and while it does address heavy topics, the relationship between the siren and this captain is so pure, it is based off of mutual respect, and it is so loving and nice. I think it's also important to note that the main character is aromantic and disabled, and that the captain is very pointedly non-white, and to see all of those things come together in such a thoughtful and deliberate way does so much good for my heart. I really appreciate that the captain does a lot of work to undo and correct the power imbalance that is inherent in a captor-captive relationship, which is what they would have had if he wasn't so deliberate about restoring this siren's sense of agency, comfort, and voice. There's also a sign language element, which is really awesome because it captures a level of emotion and conceptual depth that vocal communication lacks, and it really creates a great sense of emotional exchange. And because this is basically the first time that humans and sirens can communicate, they're finally able to understand why their species have always been at odds, and they're able to break down those walls and misconceptions. I really think this story is about these two characters bolstering each other, allowing each other to confront and overpower their own traumas in healthy, lasting ways, and it was just truly beautiful to witness. I have so much love for this book, I highly recommend it, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Then for Latinx Book Bingo and Latinx-a-thon, I listened to The Grief Keeper by Alexandra Villasante, read by Ana Osorio. This is an Own Voices queer Latinx blend of contemporary and sci-fi about Marisol, a Salvadorian refugee detained by the US government along with her younger sister, and she is told that the only way for her to legally obtain a visa is to take part in a groundbreaking new experiment. American scientists have developed a technology that allows a person to take on the physical effects of someone else's trauma and PTSD, and if the experiment fails, Marisol and her sister will be sent back home, which is basically a death sentence. And things get even more complicated when Marisol starts falling for the girl who is the test subject. This book contains triggers for descriptions of PTSD, trauma, suicide ideation and attempts, homophobic slurs, and brief mentions of violence and sexual sexual assault. This story is a thoughtful commentary on the broken immigration system and how we force immigrants into impossible situations by systematically taking away all of their other choices. It really makes you think about the adversity immigrants face, how they take on hardships and labor that Americans don't want to face, and then they're expected to be grateful for whatever scraps they get. There's also a discussion about entitlement and how we decide whose health and well-being to prioritize without considering the consequences. Marisol is expected to shoulder a lot of pain and suffering simply because she is not in a position to cause trouble for herself or make a single mistake. And this plot device of transferring grief and trauma really speaks to how Latinx folks and immigrants especially are expected to carry the trauma of others within themselves because they're never given a chance to heal from inherited generational pain. Before Marisol is even part of this program, she's already internalizing a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of trauma regarding their illegal status, and she hides all of that from her sister, which takes almost all of her energy and effort as it is. There's this idea that protecting people and protecting ourselves means we have to hold a lot of things in and never let anyone see what we're really going through, and this story says that doesn't have to be the case. I think this is a powerful, tender, honest, unflinching story with strong family dynamics and a great slow burn romance, and while I do think the world building could have been a little bit more detailed and the ending a little more specific, I enjoyed this overall and I gave it 4 stars. Then thanks to the wonderful Jessie of Bow Ties and Books, I picked up Dominicana by Angie Cruz, read by Coral Peña. This is Own Voices Latinx historical fiction about 15-year-old Ana Cancion, who is married off to a young aspiring entrepreneur named Juan Ruiz so that she can go from the Dominican Republic to New York. As a young wife and an immigrant trapped in a loveless marriage of convenience, everything is put on her shoulders so that one day her family might be able to immigrate to the States. When things start going bad in the Dominican Republic, Juan flies back home, leaving Ana pregnant and alone with his younger brother Cesar, who allows Ana more freedom and the ability to imagine a different kind of life in America for once. This story contains triggers for ableist language, panic attacks, alcoholism, marital rape, and domestic abuse. This narrative really made me think about how everyone's hopes are vested and tied up in someone else in so many ways, and the story asks if any of us are really up to the task. I think this story really hit me because it's about grooming young girls to do everything and be everything, to be worthy of happiness and success and earn success for other folks, which is an especially prevalent Latinx mindset. Every relationship in Ana's life is abusive because she is taught how to bend to others' will at all costs and to never make herself seem like trouble or a waste of space. From the moment she was born, Ana was conditioned to believe that the world is cruel, ruthless, unforgiving, not to be trusted, and sadly it seems like those lessons are only reinforced with every new experience she has. And it's tragic that Ana is taught to distinguish between love and survival as if they're two completely separate concepts, even though we often love in order to survive in the first place. It also speaks volumes that Juan gets to be a good man just because he has a job in America and he was kind enough to marry Ana, but it's so much harder for Ana to win the title of being a good woman or a good wife. I also appreciate that the story acknowledges light-skinned straight hair privilege and how Dominicans often come to America only to be read doubly as criminal because they're read as black and immigrant. But at the same time, they've also been historically shut out of activism and black movements for not being read as black enough, so they're being minimized from both ends. Ultimately, I think this story takes the narrative of someone who might be deemed unimportant and makes her important. It restores dignity to the working woman, the family woman, the immigrant woman, and shows how she has a right to take up her space. I love this so much. I look forward to reading so much more from Angie Cruz, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. After that, I listened to My Time Among the Whites, Notes from an Unfinished Education by Janine Capot-Cruzet, read by the author herself. This is an Own Voices collection of nonfiction essays about the author growing up as a daughter of Cuban refugees and how she understands the nuance of American identity and how it's shaped by the overwhelming dominance of whiteness as someone who is non-white. This is one of those books I wish I could give to my younger self because it's sharp, it's insightful, it's surprisingly hilarious, and it brilliantly puts words to the non-white experience. I love that this essay collection tackles how being Latinx in America is to inherently become a tourist to whiteness, to always be aware of how whiteness is centered in everything and how the simplest interactions that we take for granted often become an exercise in navigating whiteness. This author had me in her pocket in the very first chapter when she acknowledges that language and dialect is a privilege in and of itself. To even have phrases like white privilege, intersectionality, etc. in your vocabulary is a form of access and privilege afforded by way of certain institutions and access points. And the author just gets how every interaction in America is inherently fraught with racial politics, whether it's going to Disneyland, organizing a wedding, or navigating mental and physical health. Everything is built around a narrative of whiteness, and if you're not white, you're expected to deconstruct it yourself. Creuset explores how non-white folks are expected to navigate, assimilate to, and subvert whiteness all at once. I feel like this collection is really about how we cannot accept that which is given to us at face value, that we have to engage with, understand, and imagine ways to exist for ourselves, and that doing so is both a ceaseless and necessary kind of work. I am definitely not doing this collection justice, but it is an absolute must read. I gave this its rightful 5 stars. And lastly, my supporters on Patreon voted for me to read and review Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleaton, read by Frankie Maria Corzo and Kayla Garcia. This is Own Voices historical fiction about a Cuban-American freelance writer, Marisol, whose grandmother, Elisa Perez, has recently passed away, and Marisol has been charged with taking the ashes back to Cuba to find the perfect final resting place. During her time there, she learns more about her grandmother's life as a sugar baron's daughter, the passionate affair she had with a revolutionary, and a deeply buried family secret. This story brilliantly explores the mythologizing of Cuba because it asks, how do people go about understanding and claiming a place they've always heard of, a place that has shaped them so deeply but that's also been kept from them and that they've never known themselves. And the story portrays Cuba as a country of both immense beauty and immense heartbreak because it's a deeply complicated place. It's a place that almost means different things depending on who you ask. Those who are exiles are almost like historians preserving a memory of Cuba that no longer exists, and those who live in Cuba are navigating a future that no one thought would ever come and that fewer people understand in the first place. And that evokes a really interesting dynamic because Elisa's point of view is revealing a history of Cuba that Marisol could never imagine herself, and at the same time Marisol is occupying a version of Cuba and its future that Elisa could never have predicted would exist. I think the dual POV is very effective because you get to see the questions Marisol is seeking about her grandmother's experiences and what she's hoping to find in Cuba, and then you get the gratification of seeing Elisa's story unfold in her own words right before your eyes. I think it generates a kind of narrative closeness between these two generations. Honestly, this is like 2 stories in one and the best of both worlds, a contemporary story of self-discovery, cultural inheritance, and romance, and also a historical fiction narrative that explores those very same elements. I did find the political commentary a little bit heavy-handed at times, and I don't think this single story should be approached as a textbook, but I still enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. So now I am thoroughly exhausted. Those are all the books I read in September. As always, if you read any of them yourself, feel free to stop by the comments so we can discuss. But that's everything I have for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye!